Hi, everybody. We're here today. We're going to talk about a distinction in psychological theory about there's a difference between a psychology of possession and a psychology of use. And stick with us if you don't know what we're talking about. We'll tell you straight away. Can you talk a little bit about psychology of possession, what that looks like?
I would rather talk about psychology of use.
Oh, so you want me to do it? Okay.
Yeah, I want you to talk about the not so good one.
It's not that it's I want to be clear, sometimes we think of these things as being bad or good, and I think it's much more about being complete or incomplete.
Complete.
So what we've got right now, let's say particularly, this is certainly true in the United States, we've got a very medicalized approach to mental health. So it's highly diagnostic. We look to medications as a primary, if not, even if sometimes not even just primary, but like the only method of treating psychological concerns or conditions. And it's not so much, we're not like anti-medication or something like that. We're not like we don't hate doctors. We have a psychiatrist that we refer to. It's nothing like that. But there is a way of thinking about mental health and mental health problems within the medical community. It is very focused on possession. Like, what do I have? I have depression. I have anxiety. I have anger problems. Like, almost like I have the flu.
Yeah, I possess it, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's a personality trait, and we know that some people do make that in their entire personality.
Yeah, and there's again, it's not so much that is wholly incorrect or terrible or awful or whatever, but the problem is that because that is so out in front and that is so mainstream, that is so the status quo that we've got right now in the mental health field, there's this other side of psychological functioning that gets ignored. And that's psychology of use. So maybe you can tell us what that looks like.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not bad, the psychology of possession. That's kind of, at least that's how I was raised. I have this, I have that, therefore there's nothing I can do about it, so don't make me kind of vibe. But the psychology of use, that was what was so refreshing about Adlerian psychology, is because it's so empowering. It's like, yes, it's important what you were born with, but we're not like at the mercy of some genetics or some ideological trauma, right? Like we get to decide what we do with it, what we do and what we make of it. And that's super empowering. And that's what the psychology of use is. It's what do you have, which is important, but not as important as what you do with it. Like, it is important that we all went through COVID. What did you do with it? What did you do with it? Like, that's the psychology of use. Yeah, I like to, I like to keep it simple.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really nice way of saying it. It's not like it's not deterministic. Like, oh, I have depression, and therefore it's just like this is just something like that's it, And so I'm gonna be depressed, and that's okay. Do I think that there are, is it possible that there are, genetic and biological factors? I mean, we've got science to back some of this stuff up, right? Like, trait neuroticism is a thing. And okay, so that's there, and maybe to some degree that is, and maybe even to a rather large extent, that's genetically influenced.
And that can be okay. Like, that's okay. Like, maybe our children aren't blank slates, which is okay. Like, I kind of feel uncomfortable with that, but also I like that because it's super empowering. It's like, okay, it's not necessarily my fault that this is happening, but what are we going to do with it? Yeah,
I mean, there's more than one way to make use of neuroticism, and I'm speaking like in terms of big five personality inventory. I'm not talking like the old fangled way of talking about neuroticism. That's like how prone you are to I don't like this term, but negative emotion thing, uncomfortable, what Paul Rasmussen would call compelling emotion. How prone are you to that? There are genetic and personality factors that influence that, but there's more than one thing that we can do with that. I mean, you can turn that into I'm going to be hopeless and lie around in bed all day and retreat from the challenges of life, or we can write a really sad poem, or a great song, or create a great piece of artwork, or empathize with somebody else who's having a hard time. Or, I mean, there's just an almost endless list of possibilities of what we can do with trait neuroticism. The other thing that I would add to this in terms of psychology of use is that it is also, we also need to be aware that our mental health symptoms themselves are useful. Like this is Paul Rasmussen. Feelings are not diseases. Anxiety is not a disease. It is something that has helped our species to survive for a very, very long time.
Oh my God, this cliff is so high.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to die.
We have to have an emotion that compels us to be vigilant, to scan our environment for threats, to internally and physiologically prepare for those threats. We have to have that. And so to cast that, to say, oh, it is unpleasant and therefore it is an illness, this is very problematic and misses this huge reality of like, oh no, there's psychological usefulness, there's survival usefulness in these symptoms. There is usefulness in losing your temper. There is usefulness in being depressed. There is usefulness in exhibiting post-traumatic symptoms. There is, I could go through our entire diagnostic manual and say, oh, don't you see how this can be useful, and this is useful, and this is useful again and again and again. So,
yeah. My thinking, this is not about. I'm just thinking about my mom. Like she was diagnosed with MS when I was a baby, and it destroys your body. And she could have decided, like, this is the way that I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be depressed. She would have every reason to be depressed and angry. But instead, she decided, no, I'm going to empower others. I'm going to take this risky stem cell treatment in another country because the U.S. doesn't approve of these things. And then I'm going to support other people while I do that. And that's when she's made friends and connections. And, like, she has used that in a way that I don't know that I would have had the courage to do. But, yeah.
Well, can we talk about this? I would say, particularly in relation to Alfred Adler identified these 3 tasks of life, because I think that this is where a lot of things, like in essence, our feelings, our emotions, or our symptoms can move us towards actually attending to these challenges, and that's what he would call the useful side of life, or we can kind of retreat from these challenges, and that's what he would call the useless side of life. So can we talk about these 3 life tasks just really briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
He identified 3 tasks of life. These are unavoidable. These are put on us by nature, not by a power hierarchy, not by a government. No, these are true for everybody who's ever lived. The first is work, and that's just, look, you can't, there's some things in life that have to be done. And a good example of this is like, it's not so much about a career. It's like, if you eat off of a plate, let's say I have mac and cheese, right? If I eat off that plate, here's the reality of life. I either need to wash the damn thing, or I don't have a clean plate. Like and it's not because somebody's telling me that I have to do it. This is not capitalism foisting this upon me saying, oh, you must have this career and make X amount of dollars or something. This is nature saying, look, if you eat off of a dish, it must be washed or else it will not be clean. So there are certain things that just have to be done. And let's say that particularly within the context of a community, you simply cannot be a mooch. You can't just lay around and not contribute and expect a community to be endeared to you. We have to find a way to contribute. So that's that. The second task is it's society, or sometimes folks talk about it in terms of friendship. We have to find a way to get along with other people. And we'll quote Paul again. Boy, Paul's just getting all kinds of quotes today.
Love you.
His basic thing here is like, don't be a dick.
Don't be a
like,
dick.
just don't be a dick.
We're going to make a t-shirt, so be on the lookout.
She's going to make a t-shirt. And she's going to have quite the Don't Be a Dick merch line here. But I mean, it's really, there are like fundamental things that just they're conducive to getting along with other people. Basic respect. Not trying to control other people. Not allowing other people to control you. Learning to speak kindly, learning to tolerate not getting your way, yes. all these kinds of things, and we can.
And on that note, we're going to talk about that has to do with like the social realities of life. We're going to try and get you, Paul, on one of these calls.
Yeah,
to talk about the social.
We won't have to
realities.
quote him. We'll just let him talk for himself. So there's that, and then the last task here is sex and love, and sometimes I think the word that kind of, as I've read Adler, that trickles down is intimacy.
Intimacy.
That it's not just about generally getting along with people. We have to find a way to have intimate relationships, and yeah, maybe part of what that looks like is sex, but I'm talking about intimacy in a more broad way. these things are unavoidable. You can't get away from that. They're fundamental to our nature. And so let's say that I have some like trait neuroticism. Let's say that I'm more anxious than the average person. And so I say, oh, well, I have anxiety. Well, does that anxiety compel me to work and to get along with other people and to develop some intimate relationships with other people? Or does it cause me to say, oh, well, work stresses me out, and what if I do it wrong, and what if I do it wrong? And so then I don't work, and I say, oh, what if they don't like me? And so then I don't engage with people, and I don't get along with them. And I say, oh, well, what if somebody rejects me? And now I pull away from the task of intimacy. This is the distinction. It's not so much, I don't have to do that with anxiety. I can do all kinds of things with anxiety. I could do all kinds of things with depression, and moving towards those tasks and attending to them rather than pulling away and withdrawing from them. That's a real distinction.
Beautifully said.
You don't want to add anything?
I mean,
to that?
I was going to interrupt like 2 times, but I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, then I just get too long-winded.
Well, I've been interrupting a lot. I'm trying not to do that. Just like karate chop you so I can talk.
You're working on the social test? Well, see, I need to all see. This is an example. She's trying to work on the social test by not interrupting. Now it's my turn. I need to work on it by maybe being a little bit less long-winded and creating a little more space.
I know things.
But this is just
your face.
This is just my personality. You don't understand. This is.
It's just who I am.
I have a certain personality, and this is what it is. I just talk and talk and talk and talk, and there's no room for anybody else. That's what I mean. This is not a reasonable.
You.
Yeah, it just floats around and then descends upon me. This is maybe just on that point. People often use this when they talk about anger. They'll talk about, my anger got the better of me, as though anger is something that exists outside of me and then comes and infects me. And, ooh, no, I have anger because I sniffed it in. I sniffed in the germ.
What's interesting is as soon as I mention the relationship between anger and that it's like self-respect trying to like come up, they're like, oh, no, yeah, you're right. Like, no, I want to claim that. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, as long as it's virtuous. Yeah, but it's not that anger happens to us or that it descends upon us or that we get infected with it like a germ. We call upon anger.
To use it.
And I'm not saying consciously, I'm not saying, ooh, I need to get angry right now, but that is in essence what's happening. I'm calling upon it in order to, and this is Rasmussen again, to remove an obstacle that stands between me and something that I want and feel entitled to. And there's at some point we've got to talk with them about anger management, and we'll do a whole video on that. But basically, if we could have you take away, well, let me ask you, if we could have folks take away one thing from this video, what would we want them to take away when we're making this distinction between possession and use?
That while, this is just me, perhaps, but while it is important what you have, what your symptoms are, what you're going through, traumas, experiences, whatever it is, yes, that is important, but what is more important is what you do with it, how you use it. Whether you were born without appendages, like your legs or something, like you get to decide what to do with that. Yes, you could just commiserate your whole life and be sad, and I don't know what else you would do because I do have my legs, so I can't really relate. But in general, like you could do something good with that, or you could not. So it's more important what you do with something, which I think is super empowering, and it gives us personal responsibility about like who we're going to be, like our character and how we're going to relate to others. I think that's really empowering. That's my takeaway. I
don't have anything to add. I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much.